Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. My name is Mira Rubin, and I'm your host, and I am so excited to introduce Maya K. Van Rossum. And Maya has sparked an environmental revolution, and we're here to talk about that. She's an attorney in Pennsylvania and Delaware and New York.
In Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and District of Columbia.
See, I'm making it all up. I know it was 3 states. Anyway, Maya, I just want to tell our audience that this is the very first time that we're doing a live audience broadcast with this podcast. So you may hear noises in the background. We have people in the room, and at the end, we're going to have a question and answer period. So I'm so excited to have you with us. I just want to give people a little bit of background. Maya has authored a book called The Green Amendment Movement, and she has sparked an environmental revolution in this country with a really novel idea that is so obvious that it's really quite remarkable that we don't already have it instituted. So let's talk about what is the Green Amendment.
So a Green Amendment is an amendment that gets added to the Bill of Rights section of our state or federal constitutions that recognizes and protects the rights of all people, including future generations, to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. And as a result of the way the amendment is written and the fact that it's placed in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, it means that the rights to a healthy environment are given the same legal strength, vigor, and protection as all the other fundamental rights that we hold dear and have learned about for the entirety of our lives. Things like free speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, even gun rights. Think about how powerfully they're protected because they're recognized in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. Well, having a Green Amendment means that we get that same strength and protection for our environmental rights.
And the beauty of it is that it's by virtue of the fact that we are inhabitants on this planet that we should have rights to the beauty of the planet, right?
That's
clean
right.
air, clean water, healthy environment.
That's right.
So you are the Delaware River Keeper.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm segueing to that is because that's how you really got the Green Amendment moving. Yes?
Yeah. So I've been the Delaware River Keeper and leader of a 4-state organization called the Delaware River Keeper Network for over 25 years.
Let's talk about what that means.
So as the Delaware River Keeper, I am very literally the voice of the Delaware River. So my job is to go out and try to make sure that the needs of the river and all the tributaries that feed into it are understood and given the highest level of respect and protection in every decision-making room where they could be affected.
And the Delaware River goes through multiple states.
The Delaware River flows from New York State through New Jersey and Pennsylvania, down through the state of Delaware and New Jersey, and then out into the Delaware Bay and into the ocean. So, yeah.
So with your background as an attorney, you are actually fighting for the rights of the river and the surrounding areas.
That's right, and all the communities that depend upon the river. And we do, as an organization, our focus is advocacy and litigation, right? We do good science, we get people involved and engaged in protecting the river, but primarily it's about fighting the good fight. And it's through all of those 25 plus years of advocacy and litigation and leading the 4-state organization, the Delaware River Keeper Network, that it has become overwhelmingly clear to me that our current system of environmental protection laws is failing us and that we need a better path. We need a stronger path. And I believe that that path is the Green Amendment movement.
Well, one of the things that you mention in the book, which I thought was extremely provocative, is that our environmental laws are actually helping to promote environmental devastation rather than protect against it. And can you just talk a little bit to that, because it's a rather radical idea?
Yes, and it is shocking when people hear that, because people really believe, boy, we have hundreds of thousands of environmental protection laws in place, and so surely our water and our wetlands and our air and our communities are well protected by all of these laws. The problem is that the way these laws are structured, whether we're talking about local, state, or federal laws, the way they are structured to very literally accept pollution and environmental degradation as a foregone conclusion, something that we must accept, and primarily that we have to manage and permit. And so what happens is, thinking about the pollution and the degradation that's going to result from industrial operations or development or any other activities that are underway, the ramifications for the environment of all of those activities get thought about at the end of the process, when all that's really left for government to do is think about how are we going to permit and manage the who, the when, the where. The laws do limit the pollution and the degradation to a certain level, but they're limiting that pollution. They are not focused on how do we prevent the pollution in the first place. And then, of course, I do just want to mention there are a lot of gaps in the laws. There are a lot of things that aren't regulated, and inevitably, to the extent that we do have these laws on the books that are accomplishing that degree of environmental benefit, at one point or another, we get a bad actor into political office, and what's the first thing they do is they roll back the protection, even the protections that we do have in place.
With the Green Amendment, what you're doing is you're actually shifting the foundational paradigm. And, you know, as we think about it, of course we have right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. But our presumption in our legislation and in our current environment is that we have to protect against it instead of that we have the right to it. And that's what's so powerfully revolutionary, really, about what you're doing, is just saying, hey, this is our right as beings on this planet. And anybody I've mentioned it to up to this point has said, but of course. And they're appalled that we haven't thought about it that way. And the way that I see it is that it's sort of like the emperor has no clothes. And you're just sort of calling it out. You're calling it out to say, wait a second, this is upside down.
Yeah. I mean, think about how many times you've gone to a rally, or how many times you've gone to a political rally, an environmental rally, or some sort of other exciting activity involving the environment. Inevitably, at one point or another, somebody says, and we all have the right to clean water and clean air. And on some level, that is true, right? These are inalienable human rights that we have by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth. But because those rights are not recognized and protected in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions, while they may be your inalienable human right as a person, these are not rights that you can legally enforce when your government allows things to happen that infringe on those rights, whether government infringes on them directly themselves or allows some other bad actor to advance some industrial operation that infringes on your rights.
So what I want to do is I want to back up to how this whole Green Amendment originated, because in 2012, 2013, there was a law that was passed, Act 13?
Yeah, so in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where fracking had been advancing for several years, and was having a devastating impact on the environment and on communities, we had in place, and frankly still have in place, a very pro-fracking legislature that was really willing to bend over backwards to continue to find ways to help this industry advance. And one of the things that happened was in 2012, while the frackers already under the current system of laws was basically allowed to have their way with Pennsylvania's environments and communities, they wanted to find a way to make it even easier on themselves to advance their industrial fracking operations, to extract more gas and frankly inflict more damage at their whimsy. And so the leaders of the fracking industry went behind closed doors and they wrote for themselves a law that came to be known as Act 13 that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislators in 2012. Act 13 did a lot of bad things, but just by way of example, Act 13 gave the fracking industry the power of eminent domain, so they could force the storage of their explosive gas under people's properties, whether or not they wanted it there. It gave them automatic waivers from environmental protection standards. It mandated that communities allow drilling and fracking operations in the heart of our residential communities. So think about it. You pick where you live because you love the surroundings, and what's around you are other homes, right? Other families, other people enjoying their lives. Well, now, because of Act 13, communities had to allow industrial fracking operations to plop down right in the middle of their communities.
With no protections for schools or parks.
Well, the industry would probably debate that with you, but it's certainly, there's not much you can do when the industry is right next door to your home, your school, your park, or your hospital.
And something that was really heinous in that act is that there was a gag order on doctors.
There was a medical gag rule that if doctors wanted to get information about the fracking chemicals that were being used and might have been having a harmful health impact on their patients, the only way the doctors could gather the information from the industry about the toxic chemicals that had been used was to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
It's
right?
craziness. Craziness. And they couldn't share that information with other medical professionals.
They couldn't, or with their own patients.
Or with their own patients. Is it just
Yeah, it was devastating.
Evil.
So the thing is, it was evil. And the truth is, things were already bad. I want to be clear. Things were already bad for the people of Pennsylvania when it came to fracking. But it would have gotten worse.
There's a possibility that some people that are listening to this may still be engaged in the debate about whether fracking is detrimental or not. Mm-hmm. And I know that you're very fact-based and research-based, and I'm wondering if maybe you can dispel some of the mythology behind fracking being an okay process.
Yeah. Fracking is a highly polluting industrial operation that has devastating impacts on the landscape, on the water, on the air, on the climate, and on people's lives. It takes 3 to 5 acres at least for every well pad where you want to have a fracking operation. So that means that you have to industrialize that 3 to 5 acres. Often that 3 to 5 acres is in a forest. It's nearby a wetlands, right? It might even be on agricultural lands. And so you cut down the vegetation, you compact the soils. Every fracking site requires, at this point, 10 to 20 million gallons of water that gets shot down a borehole to try to fracture the geology of the earth to release the gas trapped in the shale. To that 10 to 20 million gallons of water, the industry adds hundreds of chemicals that are known to be toxic, that are part of the process of allowing these fracking operations to happen. The majority of the water actually remains under the geology of the earth, toxified by these dangerous contaminants. And so while the industry will tell you that that water goes nowhere, that's not true, right? It's now traveling through fractures in the geology of the earth, and over time, it will reach different water supplies, including freshwater supplies. Might be 10 years, it might be 20 years, it might be 100 years, it might be 1,000 years, but that water is now circulating under the geology of the earth. On the order of 10 to 20% of that water comes back to the surface of the earth, right? You're talking 10 to 20 million gallons per well pad. We're talking about thousands of well pads in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That 10 to 20% volume of water has now been toxified by the industry itself with the chemicals they've added, but it's also now pulled contaminants out of the geology of the earth, including naturally occurring radioactive materials. Long story short, there's no really good way to treat this highly toxic water that's come back to the surface of the earth. So in large part, what the industry does is they store it in lined pits on the surface of the earth so they can use it in more fracking operations, or they ship it off to states like Oklahoma where they inject it into the ground in the hopes that it will never be seen again. And very literally, that injection is causing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of earthquakes every year in the state of Oklahoma, which is bringing new hazards and dangers to Oklahoma.
Statistically proven.
Yes, I mean,
That
it's
it's
scientifically,
obvious.
we know it, the people feel it, there's no question.
Hi, this is Scott, co-founder of Sustainability Now. I wanted to remind you that resources and links related to this episode can be found on our website, sustainabilitynow.global. While you're there, consider signing up for a monthly membership to help us keep the show going. This year, we will be adding live events, long-form reporting, and interactive content. We started Sustainability Now as a passion project, and until this point, we've been completely self-funded. Your contribution will ensure that we can continue to build community, inspire hope, and share solutions. Thanks, and remember that together we can shape a world that works.
The other thing I want to talk about is the health hazard and animals dying and people dying and the diseases and the dizziness and the craziness that's happening for people as a result.
So that's the other thing. So we now have water gets contaminated, groundwater and surface water supplies through a multitude of pathways. Whether you're talking about the fracking operations or the storage of the toxic chemicals on the landscape that escapes, or accidents or incidents or intentional discharges, there are all kinds of ways that this contaminated water gets into the environment and into water supplies. But we know that not only are groundwater and surface water contaminated as a result of fracking operations, but so too are some people's drinking water supplies. We know that fracking releases a variety of hazardous air pollutants into the air that has very serious health consequences for those who live nearby. We know that there are people who get a variety of illnesses, including cancers, from the types of contaminants that are in the water, that are in the air. Fracking releases methane. Methane is one of the worst climate-changing emissions that you can have, right? It is more devastating for climate change than carbon dioxide. We all hear about carbon dioxide, but when you're talking about the next 10 to 20 years, which is when the time frame that we have to deal with climate change, methane is actually worse for the climate and climate change than carbon dioxide that we hear about.
You also have the light and sound pollution.
We have light and sound pollution. I mean, the stories are horrendous, whether you're talking about people's property values, whether you're talking about their health, whether you're talking about the wildlife or the pets that they love that are getting affected in innumerable ways, right?
It's
you
not a
can have
debate. It's really not a debate. So when we hear the public misinformation campaigns from the fossil fuel industry, it's important to be able to call it out.
And we also have to be clear, it doesn't begin and end with the fracking that's happening where in central and western Pennsylvania or the other states where it's happening. Now we have this proliferation of pipelines and compressor stations, which are bringing their own devastation to people's landscapes. The pipeline companies get the power of eminent domain, so they get to force their pipelines through people's properties. These pipelines become their own source of contaminants, air pollution and other contaminants. It requires the cutting of forests and the damage of wetlands and habitats. And again, the quality of our environment and the quality of people's lives are getting devastated by the cut of the pipelines that are being forced through our communities more and more and more every day. So this is a spiraling problem.
So let's back up, because the reason that we were talking about fracking is because of what happened with Act 13.
Act 13. So the big thing to know, right, with Act 13 is, again, all these things, these horrific things were happening when it came to fracking in people's lives and our environment. But the passage of Act 13 was going to make the proliferation of the fracking and the pipelines and the devastation even worse. The problem is, Act 13 had been passed by the Pennsylvania legislature and signed by the governor. So what can you do? What can you do when you have a law that's been passed by your legislators and signed by your governor? Maybe you can convince your legislators to roll it back. Well, fat chance in hell that was happening in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania then or now, frankly. So we had to find another way to challenge Act 13. And what we did at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network was we knew we were going to challenge it, right? We have been fighting fracking for many, many years. And in fact, I am proud to say there is no fracking anywhere within the boundaries of the Delaware River watershed right now today. And that is because of the leadership and the work of my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network.
You got a moratorium initiated in 2010.
2010. before the industry ever came. But when we achieved that victory and we protected our river and our communities, we didn't just sit on our hands and say, whoa, boy, we missed a big one, we're safe now. We knew, and we know, that drilling and fracking for gas from shale anywhere, in any watershed, in any community, is devastating for all of us everywhere. So we had a body of knowledge, but we also had advocacy expertise and legal expertise on my staff that we knew we had to bring to bear on this challenge of Act 13. And no other environmental organization was going to do it. We were the only ones that were going to do it, and we were the only ones that did do it. We also knew that there were 7 towns that wanted to challenge Act 13, so we teamed up, and we each brought our own legal arguments to this now joint venture. But the argument that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network brought to the challenge, to this joint venture, was that Act 13, the provisions that we were challenging, should be declared unconstitutional because actually in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution was a long-ignored Green Amendment that had been placed in Pennsylvania's Bill of Rights back in 1971, but very quickly had been declared by the Pennsylvania courts to be just a statement of policy and to have no legal strength. And so for 42 years, we had this amazing language that gave the people of Pennsylvania a constitutional right to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment. It was on the books, but it wasn't changing anything. We thought we're in a moment in time when maybe we could use that long-ignored Green Amendment, Environmental Rights Amendment, breathe life back into it, and use it in a meaningful way. And so we argued before the Pennsylvania courts, including the Supreme Court, that the provisions of Act 13 that we talked about should be declared unconstitutional because they violated the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in December of 2013, from a very conservative Pennsylvania Supreme Court, we got an amazing victory that not only declared the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging to be unconstitutional, in large part because they violated the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. But because of that victory, we breathed legal life back into that long-ignored Environmental Rights Amendment and very literally restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment.
So the thing that's really important for everybody to be aware of is that Pennsylvania is one of 2 states, Pennsylvania and Montana, that have this kind of robust provision. And what the Green Amendment movement is about is instituting this kind of language in the Bill of Rights in states throughout the country.
Yeah. After we had achieved this victory in December of 2013, as we were going forth and doing the work of using this now legally restored Green Amendment and using it in different contexts, trying to figure out what it means to actually have a constitutional right to a healthy environment, I was reflecting more and more and more on the power legally, but also emotionally and intellectually for people in Pennsylvania. That came from this environmental rights provision, that came from our victory. And I realized that there was more in this victory than just for the people of Pennsylvania, that there was a message for all communities in all states across our nation, right? That we do, in fact, have an inalienable right to a healthy environment, and that right to a healthy environment, to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments was worthy of constitutional level protection and recognition. And so that was when the Green Amendment movement was born. I went and looked at every state constitution, every Bill of Rights provision, and I found there was only one other state that had something like Pennsylvania, and that, as you said, that was Montana. There are a boatload of other states that talk about the environment in their constitutions in a variety of ways, but none of them have this constitutional right to a healthy environment that protects environmental rights, recognizes environmental rights in the same way we recognize and protect those other civil, political, and human rights we hold dear, like free speech and freedom of religion.
So something that was really important in a previous conversation that you and I had was like, well, why not just create a template and popularize this template across the country so that all these different states can just implement this and have it be done. And what you were telling me is that each state is a unique situation. And one of the perils, potentially, of implementing the Green Amendment is navigating the nuances throughout the country. So can you say a little bit more about that?
So we do actually have in our new organization, Green Amendments for the Generations. I have created model language.
And that's Green Amendments, it's forthegenerations.org.
Yeah,
So-
it's Green Amendments for the Generations is the organization. Forthegenerations.org is the website. Truth be told, if you go to greenamendments.org, you'll end up at the same place.
Okay.
So, but if you go on social media, it's all at Green Amendments for the Generations or Maya K. Vemrouse.
And by the way, for anybody who's watching this recorded broadcast, those the websites that we refer and the resources that we're mentioning are going to be listed on the page so that you'll have access to them easily.
So what we did, one of the things that I did was I looked at Pennsylvania's provision, I looked at Montana's provision, I looked at the powerful opinion that was written by Chief Justice Ronald Castile, that the opinion that breathed legal life into Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, and created what I think is the strongest model. I did that with the help of Jordan Yeager, who is actually the attorney that argued the case before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. He is one of the heroes of this story, as is Senator Franklin Curry, who originally in 1971, right, is the one who came up with the idea of having a constitutional environmental rights amendment here in the state of Pennsylvania, right? So these are important heroes, as is Chief Justice Ronald Castile. Anyway, so create this model language. There are some things about Pennsylvania's Green Amendment that I'm not so keen on. Think about it. It talks about pure water, clean air, the scenic aesthetic, recreational values of the environment. It doesn't mention climate. Right? That's because in 1971 people weren't thinking about it.
Well, now you're stepping into controversial territory again, because there are a lot of people that believe that the climate crisis is not man-made, and we've got all kinds of things around that. So how do you navigate that in the language within a state constitution?
Well, so I'm doing the model, which is the state of the art. And in the model, we want to recognize the right to a stable climate. In the model, there's actually some language in Pennsylvania's Green Amendment that concerned me, that maybe I think could be used against clean energy projects, the term aesthetic. So maybe that's not the ideal. When I work with communities in New Mexico where we're working to advance a Green Amendment, there are a lot of indigenous communities there, and they have an incredibly important cultural connection with a healthy environment. That doesn't get recognized in Pennsylvania's language. So this model Green Amendment language tries to take the best of the best, create new ideas like protecting the cultural rights to a healthy environment that might be powerful and meaningful for indigenous communities. And I go into a state, into a community with this model language, and then we work together to figure out what will work for that state. Again, in New Mexico, we added the terminology cultural. Not every state wants that. There have been other nuances and changes depending upon the state, because every state has a different personality. Some people want to use pure water, like Pennsylvania. Some people want to use clean water, right? So we just work with the community, we come up with the best model, and then we try to find our legislative champion. And most importantly, we work with the community to get them to understand, why does this matter? Why do they want to get organized behind it? Why do they want to provide energy to encourage this idea in the community? And it sort of takes on not a life of its own, it's a lot of work, but we work together in a growing community to advance the idea.
So this harkens back to the idea of individual impact, because you really only need one person organizing in a state to start getting the ball rolling. Is that true? Or a couple people?
Well,
to start.
Yeah, any great idea, right? You just need that one voice, that one person willing to stand up and give voice to the idea. And yes, then the ball gets rolling. But, passing a constitutional amendment is not an easy thing. It is easier at the state level than at the federal level, and that's why we're beginning with the states. Better strategy. We can get it done because state constitutions, it is not uncommon that they will get amended. So it is accessible to do it at the state level. And we get incredible legal strength and mobilizing strength from doing it at the state level. So we're going state by state by state. And ultimately, though, we do want a federal Green Amendment, but to get a federal Green Amendment passed, you have to have support of 3/4 of the states. So good strategy, start with the states, build the awareness and the support, get the state Green Amendments, and then when the time is right, we go for the federal Green Amendment. But sometimes I get called, I've had people hear me on a podcast, and they call me up, and they say, I'd like to do this in my state. That's how it happened in New Mexico. One person called me up.
That's all it takes.
We started a conversation, and now we have the energy flowing. In another state, a legislator heard me speak at an event, and he said, I want to do that in my state. And we started a conversation. So then he, started to advance it. Every state's different. But as you said, I need a partner in that state, an individual or an organization, to advance the idea. But it just, as you said, it just takes one partner to get it going.
You said something in our conversation about how well-meaning environmental laws can actually derail the Green Amendment. I want to talk about that a little bit, kind of with something that happened in Florida. Maybe you can talk about.
So it's well-meaning people. So the Green Amendment concept, right, it's very simple. Of course, we should all have a right to clean water that's protected as strongly as the right of people to bear arms, right? Clean water is nurturing lives. Bearing arms, in some instances, not so much, right? So, of course, the right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion, of course, the right to clean air should be protected in the same way. It's a very simple idea, but it is actually quite complex to properly write, frame, and implement. And in the state of Florida, somebody heard about the idea, a well-meaning law professor and their students, and decided that they were going to try to advance this Green Amendment in their state, and they didn't get in touch. And unfortunately, the language they wrote was not the right language, and it wasn't the right placement. It wasn't in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, so it wasn't a Green Amendment. It was just going to be pretty language that sat on the books and really didn't change anything. And so when I learned about it, I unfortunately had to try to mobilize people in Florida to prevent this constitutional language from advancing, because if it had advanced, it would have derailed everything for the state and even nationally, because people would have said, well, boy, we went to all this effort to get this constitutional amendment, and it didn't change anything. So other states would be saying, like, well, why would we do that? And in the state of Florida, they would have gotten mobilized and put forth all this effort to get this constitutional language. Nothing would have changed. When I came in and said, hey, but there's a right way and a wrong way, they would have said, you know what? We expended all of our energy, our effort, and our resources. We're not going back there. And then we would have derailed the effort in Florida for, probably at least 50 years.
Right. So the important thing is to recognize that there's a right way to do this and an ineffective and damaging way to do it.
Yeah. And to know that I'm not trying. I want to work in partnership.
Yeah.
Right. I want leaders from every state, from every community.
So we're making that call right now.
That's right.
So if you're listening to this and it's moving you, take action, stand up, make a phone call. Go to forthegenerations.org, pick up the phone, send an email, get in touch, and then let us work together to make sure that we do it the right way. You can be the champion in your state and in your community. All I want to do is work with you, partner with you to make sure we do it the right way. So now we're actually doing this broadcast from Pennsylvania, and most of the people here are from Pennsylvania in our live audience right now. So what about Pennsylvania? We have the Green Amendment, or a Green Amendment. What can we do in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So in Pennsylvania, we need to be utilizing our Green Amendment to really make a difference, and we are. The thing is, people say to me all the time, well, you still have fracking in Pennsylvania. You still have environmental degradation in Pennsylvania. So how good is this thing? It is really powerful. The thing is, we've only had a living, thriving Green Amendment in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania since our victory in December of 2013. That's not that long ago. It takes a long time to figure out what does it mean to have a constitutional right to something. In what situation Do you have a violation of the constitutional right, in what situation not? I mean, think about the rights to free speech and freedom of religion. We have had those rights for hundreds of years. So we have a pretty good idea of what it means to have a constitutional right to those things in a variety of contexts. But not in every context. We still have litigation, we still have advocacy, we still have battles over what it means in one context or another. When it comes to environmental rights, we are just at the beginning of that process. We're setting the precedents that are affecting the future and every other decision to come, as well as the decisions that are happening modern day. But we don't instantly, poof, get rid of the bad stuff, right? We don't instantly know, what does it mean to have a right to clean water in this context versus that? So we're doing the work, but we're having success. Not only did we defeat those provisions of Act 13, right, but we've been having success in forcing the Department of Environmental Protection to pull back permits for spreading of sewage sludge and allowing other dangerous activities to go forth without them first thinking about the science and the facts and the impacts. There was another major victory that went before Pennsylvania Supreme Court that determined that the monies that came from the leasing of state-owned lands to the fracking industry, that those monies couldn't just be used for the general operating budget, but because of the Green Amendment, those monies had to be used to protect the natural resources that belong to all the people by virtue of the Green Amendment. In the state of Montana, we've had on at least 2 instances where a gold mining, a permit was given for advancing devastating gold mining operations, and because of Montana's Green Amendment, those permits actually got voided. We had another situation in Montana where there was going to be a drilling operation, not for gas, it was actually to advance a development project, but had the government been forced to enforce a contract that would have mandated that drilling, we could have contaminated an entire town's drinking water supply with dangerous contaminants from nearby polluting operations. Because of Montana's Green Amendment, the government, that contract was voided, and it wasn't involved. The point is, it's making a difference, but it takes time. But it is making a difference, a powerful difference. It just takes time.
So back in the 70s, for those of you that were around then, a lot of you weren't, we talked a lot about pollution. And now we're not talking about pollution in the same way in terms of air pollution or water pollution, even though we have things like Flint, Michigan happening and what's happening here, even in Pennsylvania. What is fascinating to me about this Green Amendment is that it really is turning things on their head. And one of the things that's driven our current state of things is the prioritizing of profit over people. And one of the things that you say in the book is that the Green Amendment has the power to change everything. How we interact with each other, how we interact with business, how we interact with the planet. And I just want to explore that a little bit more together.
So what a Green Amendment does, right, is it means that any time government's engaged in decision-making, they have to think about the environmental ramifications first. And how are they going to prevent harm? It has to be at the very beginning of the conversation. So from a government decision-making process, it's transformational change.
That's actually a really big nuance, is that when these lawsuits are being implemented, it's not against the frackers. You're not going after the frackers, you're going after the government that has the responsibility to protect us. And that's the important nuance to understand. That was something that took me a little while to wrap my head around. Like, oh, okay, we're not going after the fossil fuel industry. What we're going after is the legislation and the government that has an obligation, responsibility to protect its people. And that in itself is a new idea, like to really protect its people and to preserve our rights.
It may be a new idea in the environmental context, but it's not a new idea in the constitutional context. When you're talking about free speech, freedom of religion, all those rights, all the litigation that you hear about, it's all about what did government do that allowed the infringement of the constitutional right. The same thing happens in the environmental context. So when you're talking about Act 13, it was the passage of a piece of legislation that was going to inevitably result in the violation of the constitutional right. As one justice in the state of Montana said, you don't have to wait, or not, yeah, Montana said, you don't have to wait for the fish to be floating dead on the water, right, to enforce your constitutional right. We can anticipate. In nearby Malvern, Pennsylvania, we are using the Green Amendment to say that the government's failure to clean up a highly toxic site that has been super saturated with dangerous contaminants since the mid-1980s, and the government has known about it and known about the hazardous condition of the site. The government's failure to take action to secure the cleanup of that site, that is a violation of the government's duty to act and to protect the environment. We're also using it in Pennsylvania, where we have per and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals in the environment and drinking water. PFAS, PFOS, PFOA, you might be hearing a lot about. Across the nation, there is a gap in the laws when it comes to dealing with this contaminant, this dangerous contaminant in people's drinking water supplies and the environment. We're using the Green Amendment to challenge the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for its, again, failure to put in place protections that will take those contaminants out of people's drinking water supplies, or at least ensure they have access to clean water. So we have a lot of environmental sacrifice zones across the nation. What it means is that the government has intentionally decided to concentrate highly polluting industrial operations and activities in one area, in one community, knowing that we are sacrificing the people and the environments in that community so that we can protect the, frankly, often the richer and the whiter people over there, right? A lot of people now, they talk about it as environmental justice communities. This is where, right, the people of color live, right? Brown and black people. This is where Hispanic people, African Americans, indigenous communities, immigrant communities, low-income communities of all colors, they live in the sacrifice zones because they don't have the same access to the wheels of power that the richer, whiter communities do. And so government intentionally, not despite, but because of the way our current system of environmental laws are written, intentionally decides that we are going to sacrifice these communities in order to protect others. Now, if you have a Green Amendment, when you're talking about environmental justice, when you're talking about sacrifice zones, you can't have sacrifice zones anymore, because all people, regardless of the color of their skin, their ethnicity, how much money they make, what their immigration status is, where they live, where they came from, we all have the same right, the same constitutional right to a healthy environment. And a properly written and placed Green Amendment means that all government officials at all levels of government become constitutionally duty-bound to protect the environmental rights of all people, including future generations, equitably. We can't sacrifice one community to save another. It's fundamentally wrong.
That's one of the most radical parts of, or impacts of the Green Amendment.
It is one of the most powerful benefits that come from a Green Amendment, the idea that we all have the same rights and we all have to be treated equitably. And there are ways, you know, talking about the complexities of a Green Amendment, right? The simple idea, but the complexities of implementing it. There are ways to write a Green Amendment that strengthen the environmental justice guidance and protections that the Green Amendment will have to make sure that the judge who's interpreting that Green Amendment will get it right and won't get it wrong like they did in Pennsylvania all those years ago. And there are ways to write a really good Green Amendment, but that doesn't have the same language that will ensure its proper interpretation as soon as possible, right? If a judge gets it wrong, we will always have the language on the books, and we will always, just like our civil rights and our other rights, be able to fight and fight and fight to make sure that the judges get it right. But as with everything, there are better ways to do it. And so when we're thinking about environmental justice, there's some really key language that I really like to encourage. That is saying, very literally, it says that the state is the trustee of the natural resources, and that they must protect those resources for the benefit of the beneficiaries, which is the people, including present and future generations. And that idea of being a trustee of natural resources brings a whole slew of environmental interpretation and strength that's really helpful when you're talking about environmental justice and potential sacrifice zones.
There's another...
That's the lawyer in me, sorry.
There's another movement about attributing rights to the planet and to nature itself. How does that compare with Green Amendment?
So rights of nature,
Yes.
right? The idea, it's a really powerful concept, right? The idea is that right now under the law, if a river is harmed, right, the way you protect that river, the way you deal with the pollution or the damage, is one, you have to find a law that's violated, and two, you have to find a person that's harmed that can go into court and say, I want to enforce this law to stop the pollution or the harm of this river because I am being harmed as a result of that pollution, that degradation, that contamination. What rights of nature does is it says nature has rights unto itself. It doesn't need your voice. It doesn't need you to be impacted, you a person to be impacted, in order for that river to get into court to advance the enforcement of that law that's being violated. All you need is a lawyer to make the argument, but you kind of can cut out the fact that you have a person that's being harmed by that pollution or degradation, because the river itself is harmed, and the river has its own rights and its own voice. It's a really powerful, powerful, beautiful concept that I truly, truly believe in. But think about what I said, is you're enforcing a law that's on the books. If all you have on the books are bad laws that accept pollution and degradation as a foregone conclusion, it doesn't really matter if the person is enforcing the law or the river is enforcing the law. You're still getting subpar protection because the law itself is fundamentally flawed. A Green Amendment is about fixing that legal paradigm that's about accepting pollution and degradation as a foregone conclusion. So rights of nature is a powerful concept, but legally it doesn't have the same legal power for ensuring increased environmental protection for people and nature as the rights of nature concept. Is that clear?
I think we have covered a tremendous lot of ground. I want to ask you, as we're wrapping up, is there anything I should have asked that I didn't ask?
We have green amendments that are already being proposed in 5 states already: New York, New Jersey, Maryland, West Virginia, and as recently as February of 2020 in Vermont. And we're working in a number of other states. There's great enthusiasm in New Mexico, in Maine, in Delaware, and in other states. So I want people to know that this is a powerful idea and movement that's advancing, and we just need everybody to get on board with it, to support it and become engaged, because I truly, truly, truly believe, as an over 25-year environmental advocate and environmental attorney, our current system of laws is fundamentally failing us, but there is a better path. There is something we can do about it, and that something is the Green Amendment movement. So I just hope that you'll all join.
So people that are listening to this, that are getting inspired in all these different states, what their action is to get in touch with you through, again,
www.forthegenerations.org.
and that's spelled out F-O-U-R, or is it?
F-O-R.
Oh,
For.
Sorry.
Yeah, F-O-U.
I was seeing the
F-O-R,
number.
thegenerations.org. You can type in Maya K. Van Rossum, or I think mayavanrossum.green. That'll get you to me. Type in my name, type in For the Generations, type in Green Amendments. You'll find us. And we'll look forward to working with you.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I want to say thank you to everyone that's listening. I want to say thank you to the amazing crew of people that we have putting together this live broadcast, our video geniuses and sound geniuses. I want to say thank you to Scott Billy and Alexa Henderson and Stu. I don't know your last name, but thank you. And I want to say thank you to REI for collaborating with us and giving us this opportunity. And we're very hopeful that this will reach REI's large audience throughout the country and inspire people to speak up and take action. So that's it for today's broadcast. And we're going to ask questions. We'll have recorded questions, but just to wrap it up formally, I want to say this has been absolutely remarkable to have you here, and live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world. So, who's got questions? We have a mic for the audience.
So, as a resident of Pennsylvania, where we already have a green amendment, what can we do when we go home?
Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
So there are a couple of things that you can do and must do. Is our Pennsylvania legislators, right, for over 42 years were given license by the courts to ignore their constitutional obligation to recognize and protect the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania, right? So they have 42 years of getting away with ignoring Pennsylvania's Green Amendment. So one of the most important things you can do is call your state legislator and remind them that they have a constitutional duty to protect your environmental rights. Think about whatever environmental issue that you care most about or that you're aware of and say, I'm concerned about this issue. I know that you have a duty, and I'm just calling you to put you on notice that I'm holding you accountable for protecting my environmental rights. Go to your town council meetings. The Green Amendment, right, applies to every government official at every level of government. So whenever there's an environmental issue that you care about, go to your town council as well, go to your county government and advocate on the issue that you care about, but bring the Green Amendment into the conversation, because that's part of what we have to do, is we have to transform the way government is thinking and acting. It's not all going to happen through litigation. Litigation is going to be an important driver, but another important driver is going to be the advocacy, letting government officials know that you are going to hold them accountable to do what's right. And if they don't honor their constitutional obligation to enforce the Green Amendment, they will not be elected back to office.
So I want to talk about this bottle, because it's a really cool concept, and it's a wonderful way to actually be raising money for the Delaware Riverkeeper Network.
Green Amendments for the Generation.
Green Amendments for the Generation.
So this is our water bottle. It says forthegenerations.org. We all need a reusable water bottle. Plastics come from fracking, right? So remember that. But one of the things that we want to do is we think very holistically. So if you were to buy a water bottle from Green Amendments for the Generations, it comes with this sticker, and you put the sticker on it, and you get the app Fill It Forward, and every time you fill your water bottle, you do the app, and actually money gets donated to provide clean water to communities in other countries that don't otherwise have access to clean water. So it's our way of connecting with other communities in other countries that don't have, we got a lot of environmental problems in our country, but there are other countries too that are suffering. So this is our way to connect with other places and spaces and communities and very literally fill it forward when it comes to water.
And the bottle says on it, environmental rights are human rights. Join the Green Amendment movement. And all the proceeds, 100% of the proceeds for the bottle itself.
For the bottle, for the book, for the coffee cup, for the t-shirts. I wrote the book, but every single penny goes to the Green Amendment movement.
Yes. So great swag. And questions. Wonderful. Thank you.
So I live in New Jersey, and you had mentioned several other states, New Jersey being one of them that has an initiative or just interest.
Yeah.
So they don't have the Green Amendment yet, but it's in the works. How do we get that going?
Yeah. So in the state of New Jersey, there's not just interest. We actually have a legislative proposal. We've got over a dozen sponsors on the Senate side. I think we hit our 37th sponsor on the Assembly side. We have Democrats and Republicans. And so it is moving. And what we need is we need communities, we need individuals to reach out to their state legislators to make sure they're sponsoring it. We need them to reach out to their town councils or the organizations and entities they are part of to seek and secure resolutions in support of the New Jersey Green Amendment. We need people writing letters and speaking up, because in the first instance, in most states, including New Jersey, the legislators pass a legislative proposal in both houses first. Sometimes it's once, sometimes it's twice, it depends on your state. And then it doesn't go to the governor, it goes to the people for a vote. So we need the people to be speaking to their legislators to urge passage. In the state of New Jersey, we've got some really great legislative energy and support, but we don't quite have the momentum we need to get a vote this year in both houses of the New Jersey legislature that could secure the possibility of a proposed Green Amendment on the ballot in November 2020. But if the Assembly and the Senate in New Jersey, each house voted to pass the Green Amendment by a 3/5 majority, it would be on the ballot November of this year. So they're going to need to vote on it by the end of summer. The other option is we can have them vote on it. They would have to vote on it twice, a majority vote. So, but anyway, so it's moving, there's energy, there's state of New Jersey, it's not just a good idea. In any of the states where we have a Green Amendment proposal, or we feel like we've got energy that's starting to coalesce around the idea, on forthegenerations.org, there's a state page where we have some actions and activities where people can sign up in support, and then we connect with you beyond that. For New Jersey, we actually have a Google group, we have monthly phone calls, we have a variety of ways for people to participate if they want to. So.
Hey, I have a couple questions just about the Delaware, since that's one of your
Yes.
roles on that subject. I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit to the health of the Delaware, and there were a couple things that I had, from back when I spent a lot of time on it, that I always wondered about, and those were the sprayings for black flies on some of the islands out there. Because one day I just happened upon it while I was paddling, and we were like, what's that helicopter? And then we explored the island, and then we found out afterwards that they were spraying insecticides.
For black flies.
Speaking of, the passions, one of mine is probably wildlife, so there were osprey north of there, and a month before I'd found, a couple thousand tadpoles in a little inlet on that island. So the black flies, and then there were other pipelines that were already under the river, and I know there was the Big Stop Pipeline Initiative, so I was wondering if those had an impact. And then the other one would be a Superfund site along the river, and if there's progress there. And I'm sure I can find this on the website that I just learned about, but I thought I would just ask you.
Yeah, great. So first off, Molly's gonna be very upset with me if I don't tell you that on your seat there was a slip. We always do a free drawing for a copy of the book for anybody who's interested. So if you are interested, fill that slip out, pass it to the end of the row. Molly will collect it and we'll do a free drawing right at the end of the talk. So, a bunch of things. The health of the Delaware River. The health of the Delaware River depends what reach of the river you're in and what you most deeply care about. The upper reaches of the river, we actually, and this is the reason why we were able to secure our moratorium against fracking, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network led the effort to secure a special designation and body of regulations for the entire non-tidal Delaware River that's called special protection waters. And that is because the high quality of the water in the non-tidal reaches of the river. As you move down the river, right, you get more pollution inputs, right? And so as you, and different kinds of pollution inputs. In the upper reaches of the river, you might be talking about stormwater. So you might not want to go swimming in the river after it's rained because you might have a lot of poop that's been washed into the river from stormwater. As you go down the river, you're going to have some more pharmaceutical inputs. You're going to have some more industrial inputs. But still, that being said, people are swimming, fishing, and boating along the entire reaches of the Delaware River because there's been so much work to protect the quality. So It's hard, and when you get lower down in the river, you not only have the industrial operations, you now have per and polyfluoroalkyl contamination that's being identified. It's a hard question to answer. It depends where you are. The river is 330 miles long, right? And so it depends on what reach and what tributary. Every tributary has its own story too. Long story short though, our Delaware is doing really well, and we right now, every reach of the Delaware has a designation that should ensure regulatory protections for what's called primary contact recreation, getting the water in your mouth and in your eyes, except the Philadelphia-Camden reach of the river. But there are a lot of people that are swimming and coming into primary contact with the water in the Philadelphia-Camden reach of the river. So we have a petition right now at DelawareRiverKeeper.org. We are encouraging people to sign and support because we want to get that higher swimmable primary contact designation for that reach of river too. So if you go to DelawareRiverKeeper.org, you can go to our Healthy, Safe Delaware River petition, because that's an action activity happening right now. And if we get that increased designation, we get increased protections, and the entire Delaware could have that higher, right, swimmable primary contact designation. In terms of black fly spraying.
Sorry.
Black fly spraying, unfortunately, I can remember when it was first proposed because I tried to stop it as the Delaware Riverkeeper. Unfortunately, we were not successful, right? Black fly, right, the biting flies, people don't like it. Years ago, the state started spraying for black flies. They spray something called BTI, which is supposed to impact the gut of the black fly. The assertion is that it doesn't have impacts for other species, but there are cascading impacts, right? Because other critters feed on the black flies. It is something that they do annually. It is something the state does annually, particularly the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's something that we continue to be concerned about. It's something that the state does enough science on that they're able to defend their ongoing action to do it. If you see the helicopter coming, I wouldn't want to be under the spray, but it is something that's, it's part of the current reality, unfortunately. I know it's a sucky answer, but it's a truthful answer.
Any other questions?
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how is both the legislation in Pennsylvania, Montana you had spoken about, and really nationwide building legislation impacting, protecting, and empowering small local agriculture operations from industrialized agriculture conglomerates?
Yeah. So, CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, right? Big industrial farming, and what are the implications for the small farmer? So a green amendment, right? Farmers, traditional farmers, they need clean water. And so a green amendment should, one, help them in their efforts to secure access to plentiful, healthy water to support their agricultural activities. CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, big industrial farming operations, they are a problem, right? They are highly polluting. They act immorally when it comes to the animals. It's horrific how abusive they are to the animals. They are also tend to be abusive to their own workers, and they are highly abusive to the environment, to the water, to the soils, to the air. I know in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania there was a proposed permit for a confined animal feeding operation, and the Green Amendment was actually used to challenge the permit. It ended up not going to court because there was a recognition that in the strength of the legal argument that was being made, and the permit actually got pulled back. There was a settlement. And as far as I know, that operation has not advanced. So that's how a Green Amendment's going to be helpful. It's going to be used by the people, or it might be used by the local, right, traditional farmer to hold government accountable for when they permit highly polluting industrial agricultural operations, just like it would protect you or I. So I do know in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania there was that that case. I'm not aware of cases in the state of Montana, but in every state where we have a green amendment that gets added to the Constitution, it becomes an opportunity to hold those industrial farmers accountable, right, through holding government accountable for their highly polluting operations, and to start to set the precedent that does not allow them to continue to operate, or at least not to operate the way they do, right? We do need to stop their environmental harm, but I will also say we do need to stop the immoral abuses that they inflict on the animals and the people around as well. But a green amendment won't get you to that, but we need to care about that too. At least I do. Thanks, everybody, for coming and caring.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for doing this and helping to spread the word. So, thanks, Ariana, wherever you are.
Yes, Jan left, but he'll be back, I'm sure. This was great. Thank you.
Great.
Yay.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.